click the button, give it a second.
Okay, great. So to reiterate, the last 20 minutes, we're just getting us started. Now we're going to start discussing the specific use cases for the Human Service Data Specification version 2.1 and beyond. Mike, go ahead, tell us what came out of your conversation, and let's briefly review the document.
Okay, it was a conversation between the four of us. So Paul representing a publisher of service directory information, a guy called Damien that consumes that data in multiple front-end service finder tools for different clients, and Ian, who is kind of an integrator that helps usually public sector bodies consume the data feeds and indeed helps gather data in a consistent way. We started with the 4 use cases that I put in the forum. We actually narrowed those down to 3, and I think, Greg, you were questioning why the Service Finder and the Social Prescriber were separate, and I think Service Finder is just within a social prescription tool, so we saw that as being the same thing. And we added a 4th one for bulk data transfer, because my understanding, and I may be wrong, was that in the US initially, the standard was so that you could lift data from one installation and plop it in another one. Now, we came down to a very limited set of implications of these use cases. The Service Finder, the aggregator, so the use cases were the Service Finder, the aggregator of multiple feeds across a federated set of sources of data, the ability to provide generic centralized tools which everyone can use on feeds, and the bulk data transfer. They're the 4 use cases. And we actually came down to a very small list of API web methods that we thought needed to be supported. Essentially a services method, which gets a list of services, a service method with an identifier that tells you absolutely everything about a service and all the one-to-manys that ripple out of that, including its organization and the organization attributes. And that's about, and for the services method, a small number of filter criteria that we think are important, like give me criteria for a particular taxonomy term. Then on top of that, we thought there were some extra ones which the UK currently supports that are useful, and Damien's front ends assume that they are there. So being able to filter by age and other eligibility criteria and whatever are things that we thought would be useful. And although we didn't think they should be core, we did think that they should be a formal extension, because Paul's made it clear that they've put a lot of work into making these compliant. And if you're compliant with the core or compliant with the extension, it's nice to be able to say what you do and what you don't do. We also felt there was some case, but not a very strong case, for 2 extra web methods, one with organizations and organization in details, and one for locations and location, like tell me all the services delivered at this location. We felt that that was sufficient for aggregation, because you can simply paginate through all services and pull out all the data. The aggregation use case does have a few implications for HSDS, the data specification, in terms of use of UUIDs and referencing external identifiers for deduplication. So we've noted those. And we just think that a central set of tools should be able to work with what is core and what is added on, just so somebody can say the extent to which a feed is compliant and the extent to which a feed is rich according to the fields which are available within HSDS. For the bulk data transfer use case, we did not see, and we may differ from the states where you're pushing data out to CSV. We did not see a separate case for being able to dump the data out. For data transfer, where we use it, and we do have somebody that we have one data directory that sucks in almost half of one of Paul's installations into another directory. They simply do that by running the services method and looking up every service and reading the records one by one. So we saw no use case in the UK for having a data dump. In fact, we do always emphasize that the structure is an interface standard, it's not how to organize your database, so you can choose to do that if you like. It's how to set up an interface such that somebody else can read it. So that's as far as we got, and I'm hoping we can use these use cases when we do the line-by-line review of the structure to test the extent to which these use cases are satisfied. And I don't think we're being overly burdensome in what we're asking for in the API, and I don't think we should go much beyond what I've flagged as core and optional, which is tiny, really.
Okay, thank you, Mike. This is a great start. I want us to delineate between some of the points that you were making that I think are probably prime agenda items for the API conversation, so we can loop back to that shortly. Right now, I just want to stay at the level of are these the general categories of use cases that we understand. There's a great start, and I also think we'll benefit from getting a little bit more specific on every level as we iterate on this. For instance, so to see if I can recap, essentially, the first category is someone wants to query a source of information about services that's in HSDS to find services that are relevant to their criteria. And Mike mentioned the social prescribing conversation that we had about whether querying information for an organization to which you will make a referral of a client is a separate use case or a subset of this use case. And I do think it might be a subset that said I do have some user needs that I've identified on that specific subset that I am eager to talk with you all about, but I will hold on that for a moment. I'll want to check everybody else's assumption of is that one category? Do we agree this is one category that can be appropriately described in this way? The second one is aggregating data from multiple databases for the purpose of presumably synthesizing that data into some sort of federated resource directory structure. The third use case, which I think might benefit from some more clarification at the high level, Mike has support via a generic shared online tool. And when we got more specifics about this, I think it seems like you have in mind the validator, maybe the transformer, and so, but Mike, I do want to hone in on this because I think it might help us to be more specific rather than just saying generic shared online tools, because is a service finder a generic shared online tool potentially. I do think some of this. One of my big questions for you is is this potentially best framed as improving the quality of data, standardizing data and validating that it comports with the standard. That may be the use case that we have in mind generally when we're talking about some of these generic online tools, is that these are tools for munging data into the standard and confirming that it conforms. But we can loop back to that. And then the fourth is the bulk use case. And I'm hearing Mike say that in the UK, you all are not yet sure that that there is user need for this. And I do think we have some examples of it from the US to discuss. So is that an effective summary of the four, with the caveat that we'll want to dig into number three at the very least? Mike, did I get it?
Yeah, I can expand on three, but yeah, exactly.
Great. Before we dig into any of these specific categories, questions from anybody, observations, concerns?
So I just want to apologize for being late. When I first tried to join, it said no such meeting, and I was like, okay.
Oh, no.
And then I got your email, so I'm sorry about that.
No worries. We'll try to figure out what went wrong there, Kate. Sorry about that. Glad you made it. And I see David has his hand up.
Yeah, so the one big sort of skeleton in the room that I see is that essentially all this implies that we do have like a JSON representation of the standard. And I know Referral UK has one, and they have a tool to convert the JSON table schema into a API. But is that kind of tooling needs to be formalized, and is it maintained, all that kind of stuff? I think we need to make sure, because before we do any of this, we need to agree on that methodology about transferring the table schema into something else. And is the tooling that we've got, Referral UK tooling, good enough, or is
Right.
does there need to be that kind of tooling for the central for the standard as well? And what does that mean, and how do we get that done, and all those kind of things? Because like all these points require that JSON representation.
Okay, that sounds like an agenda item for us to put maybe in association with the API protocol discussion. Maybe that's separate. That's an example of me getting outside of my zone of like of accidental techie knowledge. Thank you, David. I saw Tim taking notes on that. Let's make sure to put that on our agenda. I think potentially in association with the API protocols discussion. Skylar, did you want to talk about that or something else?
I have some feedback on the bulk data question. So
Great.
Is this an appropriate time?
Yeah, unless anybody else has any questions about like this whole frame or the whole approach, we can start getting into the specific categories, use case by use case.
Did I miss where people were just like everyone was describing how they're exchanging data now? Like, is it worth?
So
or should we do it under the umbrella of when we get into the specific cases that they would fall under?
So the Mike and Paul and Damien produced this document from a discussion of how they are, handling data now. And we will iterate this document based on what we hear from workgroup members and others. So you haven't missed it. We're still able to, to articulate that. But it's always going to be a dance to figure out at what level of granularity do we want to specify things in this document.
Yeah, well, and some of this I think really comes into the API. It's just as you've been saying, like I'm trying to figure out where we're where the line is there, because we don't want to get into API discussion, right? We only want to address the things that are relevant to the actual data structure at this point, right?
Well, what I see in actually, we do want to think on both planes at once. And I see that happening in Mike's document here. For each use case, they've done some analysis. What do developers tend to need for this particular use case? And they observe, like, here are implications for the spec, and here are implications for the API protocols.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So I have some questions and thoughts about number 3. Skylar, you have some observations about number 4 you want to share with us? So this
Yeah,
is
sure. I've been doing some, I think I've done 5 or 6. We're currently setting up a bunch of new ones. So a bunch of bulk data connections between all kinds of different systems in the US right now. And we are finding something in the bulk that needs to be addressed, and that is how to handle deletes. That specific.
Yeah. Did we lose you midstream, or were you done with your dramatic announcement of deletes as a user need?
My headset just broke.
So deletes is huge. I mean, that is honestly, I don't want to say fight, but that is a firm discussion I get into every single time that there is a new data exchange that I have to work with, because deletes are complex for various reasons, and being able to manage that is essential. And that's the difference. That's why some people do opt to literally blow data away and replace it all, which I do not like as a method. But because deletes are, people fail to take into account all the steps to do deletions and reconciliations properly. And so I definitely want to have that discussion.
Great. And I actually, I anticipate there's actually two different kinds of use cases for which bulk data might be important. One is, to Skylar's point, like automatic, like, well, batching, right? Like I want the whole set, and I'm going to batch upload it. And I think that's what you were getting at, Skylar. But then there's another one of like, maybe I'm a researcher and an analyst, and I want the whole data set to be able to, perform analysis on. But maybe Mike was suggesting that could just like come out of, like, you could get the whole data set as if you're just a service finder asking for the whole data set. But I still think it might be best to analyze that as a separate kind of use case. Skylar, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Yeah, sorry, my headset crapped out again. The thing we're kind of implementing or trying to implement theoretically on our end right now is using the metadata table as a log, and including that with, it could be that including that with the service endpoint and say, like, I'm going to go get the log of things that have been updated, and then I'll query the service endpoints, right, that got updated. But at the very least, and I would be willing to help contribute to this, creating some documentation around this so that people have a go-to kind of core methodology might be good. And then specifying that, like, if you want to be in compliance with HSDA, whether it's core or an add-on for bulk export, like, you have to implement that logging system, in a consistent way. That would have to be part of like a core specification or extension for how to do bulk data transfer. Those were my thoughts.
And I see a hand up from David.
Well, yeah, the only method that I would say that may be useful is a more like a streaming one, where you can get all the data, but you get all the data in each one, but you don't get it all in one necessarily big bulk. So at the moment you've got like listing them and then getting each individual one, which is kind of inefficient because there's loads of different requests that you would have to do. But you could ask for a request where you get all the data with all the subfields, you get it sort of in a stream, so you can get that quickly. And as part of that stream, you may also have like deletes and stuff to say, okay, there's like the open active, for example, has like a streaming option that is all built around that. So that is another potential use case if you're doing like mass uploads, like federated data uploads, and you want all the database to be in sync. That is another API option, which seems to make sense to me.
Right.
So I always gross people out with this, but we have to do a regular synchronization of almost 200,000 records. And so when I'm told I have to go record to record, I have feelings about that. Obviously, not everyone works at that scale, but if you do, it absolutely drives everything. And even something like asking someone to do transactional logging of changes, the scale starts to get quite horrifying if you're doing it at really large scales of records, and that is you don't always have control over the other end. In this case, we don't have control over the other end. So asking them to be performant and reliable and all of that's a big ask. Like even things like ensuring accuracy through transactional logging of metadata, that's a big ask for many people. And even if it's the right thing to do, I think you're not going to get a lot of buy-in to run it through. Like I keep transactional history, but the other side that I'm working with doesn't. I know they don't. So, and they're not going to do it because I say I want it. So,
okay. Kate, I'm going to suggest that you and Skylar and maybe anyone else from the US who's interested in hashing this out, we might take some time between now and the next meeting, even just over email. If we want to find time to discuss in real time, that's great. But let's see if we can hash out the use case of what are the needs and what ought to be and what are the intended results and that sort of thing. Okay, Mike, does that sound good?
Yeah, I'm wondering how we do this. I mean, you might want to change the document to just be all use cases and just keep editing it. I am conscious that I think there's a difference between a federated system whereby you take a full feed each time, as opposed to one where you're taking incremental changes, and there may be two separate use cases there.
Okay. All right, well, think through that. And Mike, I'll check with you. I think we could fork this document and generalize it and preserve your original one, or we can iterate on this document. I don't really care. Mike, let me quickly, and I want us to be able to move on to talk about the API protocols. So I don't want to get super into this, but when I look at number 3 and I see support via generic shared online tools, I'm like, I don't know how useful that is because, you know, generic shared online tools, it's a little unspecified, right?
Yeah,
but it does seem to me like I want to be able to assess the compliance of this data. I want to be able to transform this data, and I want to be able to validate that it conforms. That seems like like the use case of improving the quality of the data, or improving the conformance of data, or something like that, which I don't know if it's exactly the same as what you were going for here, but several of the tools that you call out do seem like they serve that purpose.
Yeah, I think as ever you are right here, Greg, and we could potentially we could break that out into some of the use cases for the individual tools. The biggest use case is that the person buying, in our case, person buying a feed, like buying from Paul's company, wants to have confidence that what they're buying will comply with the technical standard that they don't understand, but they just want a yes or no, or somebody wants to take a feed as part of their aggregation and they just want to know how rich and what the quality is without having to download it and studying it. So that is the use case for a validator and for a richness checker, and probably there are 2 cases there, and they're the most important ones. And the dashboard is kind of a front end on everyone's, and it's mainly a PR tool. And the exporter is just to allow somebody that is that knows spreadsheets to be able to just take a quick look at the data and visualize it without having to actually, be able to read APIs. As a kind of quick and dirty way. So I think maybe they are separate tools. I do think it's important that Open Referral as a project, and I know Tim has come across this issue with other standards, should kind of define if there are tools which are going to be funded from the center and tools which are going to be left to individual developers. Because we don't want to be developing something with central public funding that an innovator has spent thousands of their own money to develop, only to have it usurped, like Google coming along with a new tool that you invested your life savings in. So yeah, we can break that down, Greg, and if you want to do it or you want me to do it, let me know.
Well, so you're bringing up a great topic about tooling and how we make decisions about what gets invested in from the initiative versus what is just like, we welcome contributions from the community. As before, we're going to pin that topic and find a different time to talk about it. I'm feeling like there is a category of use case here, I think, for data quality assessment and improvement. And I'm not specifying their standardization and validation because I think that's implied by data quality standard assessment and improvement. It feels like that's substantively different from everything else we have here, probably worth considering. Mike, if anything falls out of that's in here, that doesn't relate to data quality assessment and improvement, but also you think doesn't fall into any of the other ones, then let's hone in and see if we can, articulate a 5th. I think 5 use case categories is good. I don't think we want more than that. So
that's a great start. So if you want to fork this document and change it accordingly, I'll give you a quick once over. That's brilliant. Thanks.
Okay, terrific. So I think there is plenty more to discuss within each one of these use cases, but I feel like we are approaching a framework on which we can aggregate our insights for the rest of this process. And so if anybody else would like to work with me on forking this document and iterating on it, I would welcome that support. That is something that we can follow up afterwards. But unless anybody has anything else that wants to be said now, really needs, Kate?
Can I give just a 2-minute? I just want to make sure all our current use cases are covered under your use cases, because I'm sorry, I'm a bit discombobulated because I arrived late. So we have like full resource database synchronization, like where we're sending huge quantities of records for mutual use of complete records. We have cases where people want a full or partial scheduled full dump of data all at once, like just a bulk, give me your stuff. That happens all the time. They don't want like updates or anything. It's like, give me your whole set every so often on schedule. We have connections from either call center or otherwise client tracking systems that want to be able to connect to resource databases to record a referral. So they want a snapshot of some basic information at the time of the referral that will not change when the record changes, because they want a record of the exact, what was the record at the time I made the referral, of the category of the record, the name, like some basics, like just the basics of this is what I referred the client to. We have a case where people are connecting related information, in our case, volunteer opportunities, to an agency, and they want to be able to pull some basic information to do some reciprocal, you know, we have these volunteer opportunities, you have the, you know, these agencies, and they don't want to, and they want to kind of make a connection between the two. And then otherwise is like reporting and data quality and stuff that I think has already been covered. So those are all our main use cases. Are we covered?
I think so. The second to last one I didn't catch because I was making sure I logged the other ones. The question,
data quality and stuff. And of course there's direct, like I am an actual person looking for a service. That I assumed was covered. And data quality was already discussed, like data quality reporting and analysis was discussed.
Oh, actually, it does bring up another one that I don't see here, which is I am an organization that provides services. I'm listed in your database and I want to update my own information. That might be something that doesn't, I don't know if that immediately falls within any of these.
So we actually, I think we discussed this before, that in our internal exchange format, we have a field specifically for saying, how do I update this record? Like it's like a return link back to be able to provide feedback and updates to the source. That's in our format. Like I know it's, I don't think it's in discussion for your format at the moment, but that has been part of our format for like more than 10 years. Okay. I absolutely advocate for that one.
Okay. So we might have, that might be our fifth, Kate. Everything else you mentioned, like the synchronization, in my mind, I'm not sure, is that bulk or is that federation, but I'm sure it falls within, you know, one or both of those as an aspect of that use case. I think everything else you mentioned is covered, but editing an individual record, say if I'm a service provider organization and I want to update my information, that seems like one that's not mentioned here. So that may be our fifth. And so I will create a new document that iterates on this one. I will send out the link to everybody. Thank you, Mike, for getting us started. Great start. Thank you, Kate and others, for your insights. Again, we are going to continue these conversations. We just wanted the framework in which we will aggregate these insights. Okay. As per usual, the API conversation, which might be the hardest topic that we have on our agenda for this whole work group, we don't have much time to discuss. Mike, I would like to hear from you and Devin, because when I fully, there was a point at which you all described your proposal, and I'm like, oh, this is actually a potentially architectural change to our approach to API protocols. I want to hear like the narrative. We have your documentation, but if you want to give us some framing on what you're proposing or what you think our options are for thinking through the API protocol approach, let's set the agenda for our next conversation where we will dig into it.
Really quickly, I mean, I think the use cases should tell us what methods we support and what parameters they should take. I think we need a methodological, non-subjective means of going from the data structure to the response format of any web method. We have such a methodology in the UK, so it's unambiguous. And that would be particularly important if we have an application profile which says, I'm going to exclude these bits. So your response format would be different from one that included these bits. But it's always, there's a formula which says what that output should look like. There's no subjectivity in it. And when we started to look at HSDA, we did find when we looked at our machine-generated formats versus the ones in HSDA, there were a few inconsistencies in the outputs to HSDA, which we would iron out if we took a pure machine-driven methodological approach for structuring the query response formats.
Okay.
So you mean you just want to apply like a theory to how we access each data structure and it's always consistent rather than individually defining all of the interfaces outside of just the approved HSDS structure? Is that what you're meaning?
I
just want to make sure I understand.
Meaning, I mean, we've got certain rules, like if we say we want a list of services, all the many to ones to a service. So an organization has many services. So we all, with a service, we give full details of the organization, but all the one to manys, like an organization has multiple contacts and multiple locations, and a service has multiple contacts, multiple locations or whatever, we don't include in the list, but we do include in the detail. And that detail structure exactly matches the tabular data structure as described by HSDS, in a way that, you know, if it's an array in the JSON, it's effectively a one-to-many in the data structure, and we just automatically come out with that without anybody having to say what they're going to call service taxonomy terms or service locations or service location address. It's just there. There's no ambiguity. Sorry, Kate, does that help?
Possibly. I mean, I think I would like to understand. So you're not using HSDA now, or you are? Like you've made your own? I'm not.
I mean, it's what we've done is awfully similar, but where we saw an inconsistency in the approach taken by HSDA, you know, our machine-driven approach has made some changes so that we are consistent with all our methods.
So, and Mike, go ahead.
I mean, I don't know. Is anyone here using HSDA? I mean, we've used it, and it makes it very difficult to do basic things like
it's really like
a service entry.
Box of hammers for a nail. Like it's honestly, it's a lot.
And in that regard, what's great about it is that anything is better. So, you know, we're going to be able to get really far really fast just by, I think, I mean, when I think of the problem is it's like, you know, we built a directory app, like a service finder app. Can we use this to, can we use the API to, as the platform to publish the data we need to build the interface that we want, which is like, show me services, show me service profiles, let me search it. So I think we can do that relatively simply, and I think what the OR UK folks have done in their API has basically, you know, tackled that challenge in a much simpler way. So I think even if just adopting that type of thing would be a big step forward without having to come up with the greatest thing ever.
Skylar, I see your hand up. I'll clarify. A lot of this is stuff that I'm like, okay, I sort of understand what this means, but let me see, Mike, if I can tease out some implications. What you're saying is you all just have a method of publishing this data to be queried by API. And the implications of that, if I'm now understanding, is why if this method were to work, maybe with some modification or whatever, clarification, then we wouldn't need to have HSDS and HSDA be separate projects and separate products, because this would just be a layer of HSDS, essentially.
Yeah, effectively, it's an interface you put on HSDS, yeah. And, right. You know, I think you'd find it simple. I think we probably ought, you know, if we're creating those few web methods that we described as core in the use cases, we should just double check that Kate's not doing anything which which contradicts those. I'd be surprised if you are, Kate. You're probably doing a lot in addition, but that doesn't contravene what we're proposing.
Okay. We only have a few minutes. I think this was a very good start to to the conversation. And the next time we talk, it's not going to be about the API protocols. It's going to be about the fields. So that's on Friday. And we will bring outputs from that conversation into the next work group meeting, which I think slated for Monday, the 1st of August. And Skylar, sorry, I almost forgot that you had your hand up. Before I try to close us out, you have a final thought? Okay. Wait, you're on mute.
Yeah, I just posted it in chat, maybe just food for thought until the next discussion here. The endpoint that my team has actually ended up using the most for a lot of things is best thought of as an endpoint for the service of location table. It would be kind of interesting if, in fact, that service of location table included a link to the organization for each of those as well, because then basically you've got like the brain of the whole operation in one spot. And just that's the one that we query to check for all related pieces of data for a referral. And that's it's been pretty useful. So I wonder if that might not be an interesting direction ahead as well. But we'll table that and think about it.
Yeah, let's and maybe that may be something that we want to include as an example within like the service finder use case, for example, that insight. Okay. Thank you all. In the last couple minutes, I would welcome any suggestions that you have for how we can prepare for and structure the agenda on Friday. I think it's going to be a subset of this group. It may only be 4 or 5 people from the work group, but there are at least 4 or 5 people from outside of the work group who have asked to join. We have several vendors from the US who have asked to join, like iCarol and VisionLink. I want to make sure everybody understands my proposed format here, given that I'm inviting outsiders in. This is an open meeting. Anyone is welcome to attend and listen in, and any attendees are welcome to discuss in the chat. The floor will be reserved for workgroup members. So this is what's known as a fishbowl format, where anybody from the workgroup is able to come and discuss with each other. The chairs or co-facilitators will be able to invite an attendee who maybe is contributing something important into the chat. We will be able to invite someone into the fishbowl, you know, if and when that comes. But by default, outsiders beyond the work group are only there to discuss in the chat. That way, you all have the time and the focus to be able to work through line by line. The last thing I'll say is, like, I'd welcome your suggestions for how we sort. Do we just go down the row, or do you have a set of fields that you want to prioritize for us?
Yeah, we probably won't make it through them all, and we should put the ones that are critical to referrals first. The eligibility, like any bound, well, whatever the equivalent of boundaries. So anything that is critical for determining good fit for between a service and a client has to be the highest priority, and then everything else can be alphabetical. So geography, taxonomy, eligibility.
Okay, that sounds like a compelling bid to me for how we would sort. If anybody else has any other suggestions, if you have specific priorities where you're like, this is really important, I want us to be able to address this before we keep moving on, please let me know. Likewise, Mike and Devin, I will defer to you all in terms of, like, you know, you put this spreadsheet together. If there are the fields that you feel like the least certain of, or that you think are the most important for us to address early, you know, let's move all the stuff that's like lower risk, lower priority to the back potentially. I also don't assume we're going to cover all the bases during this meeting, but it is 2 hours, so let's see if we can get as far as possible. If you have any other suggestions for how to prepare to make the most of your time on Friday, please let me know. And thanks again, especially to the UK folks, because I know that's going to go late in your Friday. So I really appreciate any of you who make the time to join us. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm curious why the fishbowl approach and not just seeing how it goes first.
Mostly,
I feel like
mostly because you all now have multiple meetings of context, and I don't want to spend your time getting anybody else up to speed. This is really for you, but I want to make sure it's an open meeting. I want to be able to get insight from others, and anybody who has basic questions we can field in the chat.
I mean, I feel like if we want to field basic questions, maybe we can have Mike and I could have a session with people who haven't been in this meeting to just like
Sure.
get them up to speed. I don't want to be in a situation during the meeting where it's complicated and where people feel like they don't have authorization to talk or whatever, or they're just chatting things into the chat. Because if they're just chatting a lot to the chat, we're naturally going to have to incorporate them into the conversation, or we're going to be like steamrolling them or something, and it doesn't seem like
everybody who's coming knows that this is a work group meeting for members of the work group, and that they are invited to participate in the chat. So nobody's going to feel steamrolled. They all, and if anybody is bringing up issues that are worth discussing but don't match with what you all want to talk about, then we will set up alternative options for us to discuss with them. So
I'm just saying, I think it would be better to just keep it open.
I appreciate that. I'm trying to make the most of y'all's time. This is a known and widely used format for handling situations like this. All right. Thank you.
Okay. And the other thing, well, here,
we can keep talking, Devin, but I do want to let folks go if they because it's time for them. So thanks to everybody. We can end the recording. If anybody else wants to keep chatting, I do have more time. If anybody else wants to.
I'm wondering if we can say to people, look, if there are specific points you want us to draw to our attention at the meeting, can you flag that in a column in the spreadsheet up front?
Yeah, that is something I can say to folks as well.
So
there are various ways. Devin, I'm part of the thing is, if it's only one or two people, that's fine. But if it's 5 or 6 people who come and we're dealing with the conversation among 10 or 12 people going, it's just too much. So
I mean, if Mike and I are, you're